In the cold winter of 1539, a portrait arrived in England, a painting so elegant, so serene, that it ignited the heart of a king. She wore a gown of rich burgundy velvet, with golden embroidery cascading down her sleeves. Her eyes, gentle and poised, hinted at quiet nobility. Her expression, subtle, controlled, perhaps shy, but undeniably regal. This was Anne of Cleves, and this painting would change her life forever. For King Henry VIII, weary of war, torn by politics, and desperate for a fourth wife after the death of Jane Seymour, this image was not just art, it was hope, it was alliance, it was desire. But when Anne arrived in person, Henry recoiled. "I like her not," he famously snapped. What had gone so wrong? Was it the painter's brush that betrayed Henry, or his own illusions? In this documentary, we journey into the incredible story of Anne of Cleves, the mysterious German princess, the bride chosen from a portrait, the queen who was never truly a wife, and the only one who outlived Henry, not just safely, but successfully. We'll dive into the political games behind her marriage, the artist who shaped her destiny, and how one woman turned royal rejection into personal triumph. This is not just the story of a queen who survived, this is the story of the queen who won. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden corners of royal history, the real stories behind the portraits, the betrayals, the power plays, then don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. Do you think Anne of Cleves was the luckiest of Henry's wives, or the most overlooked? Now let's begin. Long before she caught the eye of a Tudor king, before the artist's brush sealed her fate, Anne of Cleves was a duchess without glamour, raised not in a court of splendor, but in a principality of quiet power. Born on September 22nd, 1515 in Düsseldorf, Anne was the daughter of John III, Duke of Cleves, and Maria of Jülichburg. The Duchy of Cleves, nestled in what is now modern-day Germany, was no minor realm. It held a crucial place along the Rhine, a territory of strategic importance, especially in an age when religion was tearing Europe apart. But Anne's upbringing was not the gilded nursery of an English princess. She grew up in a strict Lutheran household, where piety, obedience, and modesty were virtues carved into daily life. She was not taught the flirtatious court games of France, nor the refined English manners of Henry's first wives. Instead, Anne was raised to be practical, dutiful, and above all, respectable. She spoke only German. She had little musical training, and while she could read and write, her education was tailored to German court customs, simple, conservative, and devout. And yet, through no ambition of her own, Anne would be thrust onto the most dangerous stage in Europe. It was the 1530s. The Protestant Reformation was shaking Christendom. Monarchs scrambled to choose sides, either with the Pope or against him. England had broken from Rome, and King Henry VIII, having declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, found himself diplomatically isolated. His beloved third wife, Jane Seymour, had died, giving him the son he so desperately craved, Edward. But Henry, now pushing 50 and riddled with ulcers, still needed a new wife, not just to warm his bed, but to secure a powerful Protestant alliance. Enter Thomas Cromwell, Henry's ambitious chief minister, ever plotting England's future on the great chessboard of Europe. Cromwell had a vision: to ally with the German Protestant princes against the threat of Catholic invasion. And at the center of that strategy stood one woman, Anne of Cleves. But there was a problem. Henry had never laid eyes on her. No courtly meeting, no diplomatic ball, not even a letter written in her hand. How then could he fall in love? The answer was simple and dangerous: a portrait. To secure the king's approval, Cromwell turned to the finest artist in England, a master of likeness, a man trusted even by the king himself, Hans Holbein the Younger. He had painted kings, queens, scholars, and statesmen, but in 1539, Hans Holbein the Younger was given a commission unlike any other. His mission? To travel across the sea to the court of Cleves and bring back not a treaty, not a jewel, but a face, a true face, a portrait so faithful that it could win a king's heart or doom a diplomatic dream. Holbein was no ordinary artist. Born in Augsburg and trained in Basel, he had become the most celebrated portraitist in England. His art captured not just features, but character. His sitters seemed to live and breathe on canvas. Even Henry VIII had praised him, once saying, "Other painters are but shadows. Holbein is the true master of life." So, in the autumn of 1539, Holbein crossed the Channel and journeyed to the Duchy of Cleves. There, under the watchful eyes of Anne's brother, Duke William, he was granted a rare sitting with the princess herself. We do not know how long she sat. We do not know what she wore that day. But what Holbein delivered was unforgettable. In the portrait, Anne of Cleves stands poised, reserved, yet striking. She wears a gown of dark crimson, deep and rich, with heavy sleeves embroidered in gold. A high neckline covers her modestly, in keeping with her Lutheran values, and over her shoulders lies a fur-lined mantle, suggesting her noble rank. Her head is adorned with a structured headdress, framing her face with geometric precision. But it is her expression that captures the imagination. Anne gazes outward, not smiling but not cold. Her eyes are almond-shaped, contemplative. Her lips are full but firm. She seems serene, perhaps cautious, maybe even shy. She is not flirtatious. She is not seductive. She is, quite simply, dignified. And for Henry, that was enough. When Holbein returned to court and unveiled the image, Henry was entranced. "She is fair," he declared. "I am well content." The king's desire grew rapidly, not just for Anne's face, but for the alliance she represented. A German wife meant Protestant unity, a blow against the Pope, a check against France and Spain. In late 1539, Anne of Cleves was summoned to England to marry a man she had never met. But as her ship landed at Deal and she prepared to meet Henry in person, she had no idea what was coming. Neither did he. It was New Year's Day, 1540. Eager to surprise his bride-to-be, King Henry VIII disguised himself and rode out to Rochester Castle, where Anne of Cleves was resting before her official entry into London. He intended to play a romantic game, a chivalric flourish from the tales of old, burst into her chambers in costume, steal a kiss, and reveal himself as her beloved husband-to-be. He wanted passion, recognition, delight. What he got was confusion. As Henry entered, dressed plainly and unannounced, Anne looked at him blankly. There was no spark, no swoon, no joyful gasp, just bewilderment. And when he moved closer, when he tried to kiss her, Anne recoiled. To her, this was no romantic gesture. This was a strange man, violating the careful court decorum she had been raised to respect. She had no idea it was the king. Humiliated and chilled, Henry stormed out. He turned to his advisers, seething, "I like her not. I like her not." From that moment, the enchantment was broken. Henry later claimed Anne was nothing so fair as she had been reported. He described her body as ill-favored, her breath as unpleasant, her skin as coarse. Some reports say he even doubted she was a virgin. Others suggest he called her a Flanders mare, though that phrase may have been added later by gossipy courtiers. But what truly enraged him was betrayal. The image in his mind, born from Holbein's paint, did not match the flesh and blood woman before him. Had Holbein flattered her too much? Had Cromwell manipulated the king? Or was Henry simply blinded by his own expectations? In truth, Holbein's painting was remarkably accurate. Modern art historians, examining his work, believe he did not beautify Anne beyond reason. What Henry saw was a real likeness, but Henry didn't want real. He wanted fantasy, a bride who looked like Jane Seymour, a woman who would take his hand and melt before his power. Instead, he got Anne of Cleves, awkward, sincere, unfamiliar with English customs, and completely untrained in the seductive dances of courtship. Still, the wheels of state were already turning. Her arrival was public. The alliance with Cleves was sealed. The wedding could not be undone without scandal. Not yet. January 6th, 1540, 12th night. The wedding of King Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves took place at Greenwich Palace in a small private ceremony. The vows were said, the rings exchanged, and the blessings pronounced. But behind the royal smiles, tension simmered. Anne was calm, dignified, and ready to serve as queen. Henry, however, wore the look of a man trapped in his own chess game, outmaneuvered by his own minister, his own artist, and his own desperation. He performed the ceremony. He did his duty. But as night fell, and Anne was led to the royal bedchamber, the charade began to unravel. The next morning, Henry emerged sour and scowling. He told his physician and closest courtiers, "I liked her before not well, but now I like her much worse." He confessed he could not bring himself to consummate the marriage. Despite lying beside her, he claimed there was no desire, no passion, no movement. The king blamed Anne's body, her breasts, her flaccid skin, shifting blame everywhere but his own pride and age. But Anne, discreet and obedient, never complained. She remained modest, courteous, and respectful, exactly as she had been raised to be. If she noticed Henry's coldness, she said nothing publicly. If she was humiliated by his rejection, she bore it in silence. And all the while, another storm was brewing. Henry began to question the marriage's validity. Had she been pre-contracted to marry the Duke of Lorraine years earlier? Could this old engagement be used to void the union? Meanwhile, Anne was failing to captivate the court. She struggled with the language. She did not sing or dance like Catherine of Aragon. She did not charm or sparkle like Anne Boleyn. She was polite but plain, present but forgettable. Thomas Cromwell, the man who had arranged the match, watched his influence slip. Once the king's closest adviser, he now found himself under scrutiny. Henry's anger turned inward, to Cromwell, to the alliance, to his own mistake. By June, Henry had made up his mind. The marriage had to end. On July the 6th, 1540, barely 6 months after their wedding, the marriage was formally annulled. The grounds were simple: non-consummation and a prior betrothal that had not been properly resolved. But this time, there would be no blood, no tower, no sword. Anne of Cleves did not protest. Instead, she agreed, and in doing so, she won. When the marriage was annulled in July of 1540, Anne of Cleves could have wept. She could have begged. She could have vanished into the shadows of history, humiliated and cast off. But Anne chose a different path. She accepted Henry's decision with grace, dignity, and strategic wisdom. In doing so, she earned something no other wife of Henry VIII ever truly received: his favor. As part of the annulment settlement, Anne was showered with wealth, lands, and titles. She was granted Richmond Palace and Hever Castle, the former home of Anne Boleyn. She received a generous income of £4,000 per year, an immense sum for the time. She was given precedence over every woman in England except the Queen and Henry's daughters. And most remarkably, she was styled as the King's beloved sister. She was not exiled. She was not imprisoned. She was not slandered. Instead, Anne became part of the royal household. She attended court functions. She dined with the king. She was even present at the celebrations of Henry's next marriage to Catherine Howard, a girl barely in her teens. And when Catherine Howard fell, executed for adultery, Anne briefly hoped she might be recalled as queen. But Henry declined. Still, he kept her close, continued her allowance, and even gifted her extravagant New Year's presents. In her own quiet way, Anne had achieved the impossible. She had escaped Henry's wrath and earned his respect. Unlike her predecessors, divorced, beheaded, or dead, Anne lived in comfort and freedom. She took no lovers. She made no political waves. She never returned to Cleves. England became her home. She grew fond of the English court and of the king's children. She was particularly close with Mary, Henry's eldest daughter, who would one day become Queen Mary I. Despite being a foreigner in origin, Anne became a fixture in the Tudor tapestry, a German duchess turned English gentlewoman. And when Henry died in 1547, Anne mourned him not as a discarded wife, but as a friend. She would outlive him by a full decade. Her final years were spent at Chelsea Manor in quiet retirement. She died on July 16, 1557, aged 41, likely from a form of cancer or a lingering illness that caused a gradual decline in her health. She was buried in Westminster Abbey, the only one of Henry's wives to rest there, not a queen in life, but honoured in death. Westminster Abbey, the resting place of kings, queens, saints, and statesmen, and somewhere within its hallowed stones, beneath the floor of a quiet chapel, lies Anne of Cleves, England's forgotten queen, and its most remarkable survivor. She had no coronation, no children, no dramatic fall from grace, yet her legacy echoes louder than many of those who sat beside the throne. In the annals of Henry VIII's 6 wives, Anne of Cleves is often treated as the comic relief, the woman whose portrait tricked a king, the so-called Flanders mare, the failed queen. But the truth is far more compelling. Anne did something none of Henry's other wives managed to do. She walked away from the Tudor court with her life, her dignity, and her fortune intact. She knew how to lose and turn it into a win. She was no court seductress, no schemer, no martyr. Instead, Anne was something rarer, pragmatic, kind, and quietly intelligent, and that, in the end, may have saved her. The portrait that started it all still hangs today at the Louvre in Paris, and a copy in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. People stare at it and wonder, did Holbein lie? But perhaps the real question is, did Henry lie to himself? He wanted beauty, diplomacy, and adoration. He wanted Anne to be a fantasy, but Anne was human, real, a woman raised far from the theatre of English flirtation. She came in good faith, and when cast aside, she did not cling, she adapted. Her legacy is not carved in stone or stained in blood. It lives in her survival. In a world where queens were disposable, Anne of Cleves rewrote the rules. She took rejection and spun it into freedom. She lost a crown but gained a life. She walked out of the shadow of Henry VIII, not as a cast-off, but as the woman who endured. No trial, no execution, no tragedy, just peace. The quiet triumph of Anne of Cleves. If this story fascinated you, if you saw Anne not just as a forgotten wife, but as a survivor in a brutal age, then give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and join the conversation in the comments. Was Anne of Cleves the luckiest of Henry's queens, or the smartest? Thank you for watching, and remember, history isn't just what we remember, it's also what we choose to forget. Until next time.